Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right, so I'm going to pull up the presentation and then we will get going. Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, so for everyone, just some logistical things here. If you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, just drop them in the Q&A and we'll answer them. And this is the third webinar in this series. And in the first one, we covered how to choose a short-term rental market. The second one, I don't remember. And then the third one is how to build wealth with short-term rentals during a recession. And I think this is a pretty appropriate topic given everything that's going on with the economy, higher interest rates, kind of a slowdown in the real estate market. And so, but it seems like things are kind of picking up, but we'll see. All right. Let me just stop here. Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, so this is our standard disclaimer. Basically, we are saying that we are not giving any personal, financial, tax, legal, or investment advice in this presentation. This is purely educational. And so please, please, when you are investing, be sure to seek out your own professional opinions. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. So the first thing we're going to cover is how, really, if you kind of look at what happened the last 10 years before this last 12 months with all the interest rates going up, but before that, from 2011 to 2022, the real estate market just shot up, and how anybody could have really made money between that time period. And then I'm going to share the 4 major lessons that I learned from investing during the 2008 recession. And I'll share with you that there are probably very few people around that these days that were investing back in 2008. The strategy for building wealth during a downturn, and then lastly, how to use the downturn as an opportunity of a lifetime. Okay, Leti, do you want to kind of provide our?
Sure. Yeah, for those of you who haven't joined us before, basically Kenji and I were both hospitalists by training, and we achieved financial freedom in 3 years using real estate investing. When we started together in 2015, we didn't have a whole lot of money, and so we started with really small duplexes and 1 fourplex our first year. And what we've been able to do is force appreciation or increase the value of the properties over the last few years, and then sell them and roll them with 1031 exchanges, tax deferred, and buy bigger properties. And so now we're up to over 150 units that we own ourselves. And then we also sometimes participate in syndications as general partners. So we're general partners in an additional 604 units. We have long-term rentals, short-term rentals, we have a commercial property, and then Kenji has experience with long-term rentals and short-term rentals going back to 2001. And we've taught over 3,000 physicians now have gone through our courses, Zero to Freedom and Accelerating Wealth, and many of whom have gone on to achieve financial freedom, which is the best thing we can watch. And Kenji actually bought his first short-term rental back in 2006. He's been through a lot of challenges in his investing portfolio. He went through several recessions, started investing during 2001 and then went through 2008. And then there was a really mini recession in 2020, right around COVID in real estate for about 6 months. And then here we are now. When we started investing in 2015, the reason we started doing it, we were just really overworked and didn't feel like we were going to have time for a family, didn't feel like we wanted to do this week on, week off. We were both working more than full time, didn't want to do this for the next 30, 40 years. And I know that's a story that a lot of people share. We just really wanted some freedom, and we didn't want to continue on the path we were on. And so we did this, largely alone. We didn't have a lot of mentorship. We didn't have a community. And so it took us much longer than it's taken a lot of our students, which is amazing to watch. And we really just don't want people to go through the challenges that we went through. We want to shorten your time frame. We want you to help avoid mistakes. We want to make it easier for you than it was for us. And that's really our mission. And this is really a movement. It's not just Kenji and I, it's our community. It's a whole movement of doctors going out and investing in cash flowing rentals that bring them in income every single month so that they can achieve financial freedom and they can live that life they love. And that's really a powerful thing, because what it's ultimately going to allow is us to all change medicine too. And we not only have high income doctors, we also have a lot of high income professionals in our community as well.
Yeah, and then a lot of spouses of doctors are not physicians. I mean, there are some dual income physician families, but most of the I would say a lot of the doctor spouses are not physicians. Okay. All right. So so I wanted to kind of share for those of you who have never kind of seen this chart, maybe you have seen this chart, but this is the house price index for the entire United States. And this is data from Fred, which is, well, the data, Fred actually compiles it from the US Federal Housing Finance Agency. And so this is looking at home prices across the country. And you can see that there was a rise, not unlike the rise over the last 10 years, but there was a rise from about 2001 all the way to about 2008. And you can see house prices just climbed significantly and then peaked right around 2007 and then started to drop and then dropped all the way to the lowest point in 2011. And then from 2011, it really climbed for a really long period of time, from 2011 all the way to 2022. And then finally, more recently, there was a slight dip down, but it wasn't a steep drop. It was just a slight dip. We don't know what's going to happen after this, but at least for now, when you kind of, but the point that I wanted to make here was, if you really look at this time period between 2011 and 2022, right? So that's an 11-year period. Anybody buying during this period could have made money, right? So you could have bought a property here without doing much analysis or thinking or anything. The price of that property probably would have gone up. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that, you know, during this time when everything's going up, first of all, everybody feels like they're a real estate guru. Everybody feels really good about their skills as an investor. But at the end of the day, I think the people who have really, really know how to invest are the people who invested not just during good times, but also bad times. And during those bad times, there were a number of lessons that people learned, and we're going to share these lessons. Actually, sorry, I have learned the 3 major lessons. There are actually 4 major lessons that we're going to cover from investing in past recessions, and especially during 2008. Leti mentioned that there was a recession in 2020, but it was a really brief one. And you can see that real estate prices didn't actually go down during that time. Now, during the 2008 recession, though, you can see that real estate prices plummeted. And if you look at this peak here, all the way to here when the prices recovered, this is about a 7 to 8 year period. So if you bought something here, it would have taken about 7 to 8 years for the price to have recovered back to the point where you bought it here. And so that's a long time to wait for anybody who's buying maybe here. And if you're betting on appreciation, you might wait another 7 or 8 years before prices come back to this point. And so therefore, what you really need to do is you really need to learn the lessons from investing during past recessions, because you can still make money even during this time period here. You can actually do really well during this time period. And that's what we're going to cover here during this presentation. And so,
can I just make a couple of points of clarification too? So some of the things I want to clarify is that we're talking about specifically anyone could have made money in market appreciation. And so market appreciation, you have no control over, but this is how a lot of people invest. They think that if they buy a property, it's the value is going to go up automatically. There's going to be market appreciation. And the assumption is, you know, I can buy a property that maybe is cash flow neutral or cash flow negative. It doesn't really matter because it's going to appreciate over time with market appreciation. And so I'm going to do well. And if you were that person kind of thinking that and you started buying it 2013, the odds are you've done really, really well. But this is macro level data. And so within this, there are variations too, market to market. And then of course, just even within deals, right? You can have bought a bad deal and had, that property not do well. And maybe the market didn't really appreciate that much and you bought a bad deal and you didn't do well. So these are really market level trends. So I want to point that out. And then Kenji, can you talk about whether this is just single family or does this include multifamily too? Because I think that's another really important thing to talk about, the difference between single family and multifamily.
I actually don't know the exact question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. My guess is this is mostly single family because this is really the house price index. And, I think one of the things that I hope you guys take away from this is that single family homes are a lot more affected by downturns and recessions, and likewise also more affected oftentimes when there's an increase in valuations. And so if you own a single family home in a neighborhood and all the values of the properties around you go up, then your property is going to go up too. A multifamily and especially larger multifamily are a little bit different in that they're valued based on the income that they're coming in. But even during recessions, multifamily will be affected, especially if there's a lot of vacancy. And so just single families, the big takeaway is single families are a little bit more likely to be affected by recessions than multifamily. But nonetheless, almost everything can be affected.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about buying a short-term rental, a lot of those are single family. They don't have to be single family, but a lot of people do buy single families for use as a short-term rental.
Yeah, and some markets will be affected more than others, right? So if you're buying a single family home in a vacation area, it may be more affected than a single family home in an urban area that's growing. So you also, again, these are macro level trends. It's not going to be relatable to every single market.
So, really the point here is that if anybody could have made money during this time period, then the question is, how do you make money during this time period here? And that's where really experience really matters. And if you kind of look at, you ask this question, how many people do you know who invested during the last downturn? So I'm talking about actually investing, not somebody who, maybe bought a single family home, or maybe they just started investing. I'm talking about, they were investing, here, before, no, sorry, this is looking at the unemployment rate. This has nothing to do with housing, but it just illustrates to you when there's high unemployment, that means that people aren't paying their rent, or they're getting displaced, or they're moving to from A-class properties to B-class properties. So nicer properties, more expensive properties, to cheaper properties, right? There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of change. There's a severe impact, a negative impact on the economy. But I use the unemployment because it just kind of goes to show you what happens during these downturns. But really what I want to just show you is that the last major downturn, now of course we had this COVID downturn where there was a spike in unemployment, but it was really short-lived and there were a lot of subsidies given during that time. And so the impact of this on housing was very, very minimal, but the impact of this was very severe. And the point is that it's been 15 years since the last major downturn. And that's a long time ago. So the question is, how many people do you know who was actually investing during this time period? And, I can go back all the way back to 2001. That's when I started investing. So I actually experienced this downturn, the 2001 downturn, as well as the 2007, 2008 downturn. All right, so what were the lessons that I learned from investing during really not just the 2008 recession, but the 2001 recession? But the 2008 recession was the big one, right? It was called the big recession. And I think one of the things that's different about somebody who has lived through a downturn, who has invested through a downturn versus just kind of learned about it, is that I really internalized the lessons, right? Because it was, at the end of the day, it was emotional, right? It was painful. I had to work 26 shifts out of every month to pay for my condo in a building like this, couple condos that I own in a building like this, just to pay the mortgage, utilities. The rent didn't cover the mortgage and utilities. I was cash flow negative, so I had to work really hard. So there was a real emotional impact on me. And I'll tell you, the value of that is that, the reason why you remember things so much better when you tie it to emotion is that, just think back to like 9/11, right? 9/11 on that day, you remember where you were, you remember what you were doing, but you probably have no idea what you were doing on 9/11, 2022, right? You probably have no idea what happened that day or what you were doing or anything about that day. I don't. But I do remember exactly where I was on 9/11, 2001. So that's why, right, when you have emotion, you're going to remember things. And I have internalized these lessons, and this is why we harp on them all the time. This is why we teach this stuff in our course. This is the foundation of what we teach in our courses. So the first lesson is you have to buy for cash flow, and you cannot buy for appreciation. I can't tell you how many people, friends, colleagues that we know who preach this stuff, who go around saying, we have friends in Honolulu who have told us things never depreciate in Honolulu. Everything always appreciates in Hawaii. And that's just not true. I mean, if you look at the house price index, prices have dropped in Hawaii. And so if you hold on to this belief, then it's gonna misguide you. But even no matter how tempting it is to believe, especially with this last 10 years of appreciation, no matter how hard, how easy it is to forget this lesson, I will never forget it, right? So I'm always going to make sure that no matter what, I'm always going to prioritize cash flow over appreciation.
Yeah, I just want to give you guys a little context too to what put Kenji in this situation, because I think it's really useful for you to hear and to learn from. What he was buying is he was buying these high-priced condos like this. He owned a couple units in this building. And again, they were not cash flow positive. And then the other thing he was buying was raw land. And raw land doesn't have anything on it that's gonna bring in income every single month. And so, raw land is really great when values are going up and you can sell it at a huge profit, 3 months later or 6 months later after you buy it. But it is not good if you're stuck with it for 10, or I think we were stuck with one plot for like 13 years.
13 to 15 years.
15 years. And even after we went to sell it, he had bought it for $150,000, like 15 years before. We sold it for like $45,000. And you can imagine he paid taxes all that time. He paid HOA dues. He was paying down his mortgage. So raw land is especially dangerous for betting on appreciation. And the other thing that's more dangerous is these type A properties are because when people start to lose their jobs, they're going to tend to move to other types of properties that are a little bit cheaper. And so just kind of keep that in your back of mind. That's what put him in this situation, because he had all these fancy condos and he had all this raw land that wasn't bringing in income. And ultimately, if you don't get income in from your properties every single month, then they're a liability, meaning you have to pay to support them. And that was the situation he was in, was he had to pay to support them. And because they had lost value, he couldn't sell them. And so this is why this buy for cash flow is really, really important, because ultimately, although it sucks in your mind, if your property loses some value, if it's cash flowing, it doesn't matter. You can continue to hold on to it. You can ride it out for the next 5 or 10 years. And so that's what you're really looking for, is to make sure you're buying a property that brings in money every single month so that you can afford to keep it as long as you want. And then also, we're not going to talk about forced appreciation here, but that's another way that you can mitigate risk. If you buy a property that needs to be fixed up and you fix it up and it's worth a lot more, that just increases your cash flow even more. And then if you have to sell, you have that option to be able to sell and not walk away and bring money to the table like he had to.
Yep. And the other thing that with this building, that is a good lesson for people who are interested in investing in short-term rentals, is that this building had an HOA that put a rental cap in place. And so I could not, once my lease was up, then I had to go into a queue and wait until the next time somebody's lease ended and their rental period ended. And so it was like probably going to be once the lease ended, it was probably going to be like another 2 or 3 years before my turn came up and I could rent the place again, because again, there was a rental cap. Only a certain percentage of the units in this property could be rented, right? And so it just talks about how HOAs can be very onerous. They can really restrict your ability to rent, and it could shut down your short-term rental overnight, right? All it takes is a vote by a few people that live in this building, the HOA board, and then that's it. You're done. And you all of a sudden you now have a new boss that you have to work for. You have to go work to go pay the bills.
Yeah, so when you're buying condos, especially, be very thoughtful about the HOA and make sure it has a long history of allowing short-term rentals or long-term rentals, and that it doesn't have any of these kind of rental caps, and that there's some really friendly individuals on the board, and just know you're taking on a little bit more risk because things can always change with an HOA.
Yeah, it's not just condos, right? I mean, it's any property that you buy in a, let's say, a vacation area is probably going to be governed by an HOA. And so you're going to really have to be careful about HOAs. And we talk a lot about that. It's basically called risk mitigation. You have to really think through the risks, and you have to think about how you can minimize those risks. Okay, the second major lesson, and you probably, maybe you have or maybe haven't seen a lot of news about people having large multifamily buildings being foreclosed upon. And the issue there was that they didn't have this long-term debt. And we've been talking about long-term debt for, I don't know, the last 4 years that we've been doing this, right? 4 or 5 years, right? Doing this course, we've been talking to students about making sure that you secure long-term debt. Don't get into a situation where it's a short-term debt and then the loans due. So that's what happened to me, right? So I got some loans in 2006. It was a 3-year loan. And so by the time that loan was due in 2009, that was the height of the recession. And none of the banks were lending. And I thought I could refinance. I thought I can get a new loan. But again, none of the lenders were lending, right? And so this is, again, another lesson that if you didn't have that emotional pain from back in 2008, like, and you just intellectually know this, you can tend to forget it. And that's what I think that's what happens to people, is that they get over exuberant, excited about investing, the prospects of growing your portfolio, but then you forget the one of the key lessons, which is you want to make sure that you secure long-term debt. And the short-term debt is really attractive because the short-term debt can sometimes have much lower interest rates. And in a high interest rate environment, it's very tempting to go out and get a 3-year ARM, which is a 3-year adjustable rate mortgage, or a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage. It's very tempting to do that, but there's risk there if you're going to do that.
Yeah, one thing I was actually commenting on, I think our Empire Builders Facebook group this today actually, was one of our students was saying, well, potentially I could get a lower rate loan if I do a 1 year, and then I can adjust it and I can get a lower interest rate next year. And I said, I don't know if that's a good idea, because you really want to think about where we're going to be next year. Nobody really fully knows, but if we're in a recession and the property's lost value and maybe the interest rates have even gone up higher. I know there's a lot of people who think that interest rates are going to go down. But there is the risk that if the interest rates do go down, if they think that we're through the worst of inflation and they lower the mortgage rates or the interest rates, then we could actually have inflation come back up, and then they could increase it again. And if you look at the 1970s, that's what they did. They increased interest rates, they lowered them, they increased them again because inflation went crazy, and then they lowered them again. And they went through the cycle like 4 times. And at maximum, the interest rates got up to like 20%. You don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to be betting that a year from now, the interest rates are going to be lower, and then they're not lower. And not only that, your property's lost value. Like, you just don't want to be in that situation. So when we go and we get loans with ARMs, we're usually choosing the 7 and 10-year ARMs, because we want to give ourselves that buffer that if things aren't good in 3 years, we can continue to hold it. And, odds are high that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have some opportunity to refinance. Because when you look at that graph we showed you very early on, it was about 10 years for things to really get back. And so you want to have that like long period where you have the ability to be a little bit flexible, because you just can't predict exactly what's going to happen with the market, and then also interest rates.
Yeah, but it's not just interest rates, right? I think the one of the other keys here is that, and that I think people don't talk about enough or don't write about enough, which is that the banks shut down. Literally, banks stop answering your calls. Like that's what it feels like, right? It's like crickets. They will not loan you money, right? I mean, it happens overnight. It's very scary because you're sitting there going like, wait, what do you mean you're not going to give me another loan? Right. And with the property that I bought for 125,000, back then you could actually buy properties with no money down. So my loan was 125,000. I bought it for 125,000. And they said, nope, like we're not going to give you another loan. After 3 years, they're like, nope, we're not going to give you another loan. You have to pay back 125,000 right now. Right. That's what it feels like, right? That's what you can get into. It's not refinancing into a higher interest rate loan only. Like, of course, that there's definitely an issue. That's definitely one of the potential issues. But the other issue that's even scarier than that is when they literally say, nope, you can't get any loan, not at any interest rate. And so again, that's another lesson that most people just don't know if they haven't been investing back in 2008.
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that start to happen in COVID.
Mhm.
We were in the middle of a loan when COVID hit. And the loan did end up going through. There was lots of concern that it was going to fall apart, but it did end up going through. But like a couple days before it was supposed to close, the bank actually required we bring hundreds of thousands of dollars more to store as reserves for them. And they just told us a couple days before the loan was supposed to close. So there was a lot of drama about whether or not we were going to even get a loan. And then they added all these reserves. So we just want you to keep in mind that things can dramatically shift from what we've seen in the last 12, 15 years of really good times and made it very, very easy. But things do shift when there is a recession.
Yeah, there's always an expectation that, oh, I can refinance this or, I can get a loan, and it's just not true. All right, next one is making sure you have adequate cash reserves. This might seem obvious, but what we see is that people just don't set aside enough money, and they get themselves into trouble. I was just mentioning there were some cases of multifamily properties being foreclosed upon recently. And that was one of the issues, that they just didn't have enough cash reserves. And you really should set aside more than you think, especially if you're going to be going into a major recession. What could happen is that, and what happened to me in this building was that I just couldn't rent it at the rate that I thought I originally expected, right? That's when times were good, when renters were, they were, willing to pay whatever. But when people start losing their jobs, then there's a much smaller pool of renters, and they have a lot more negotiating leverage. And so I just wasn't able to get the rent that I needed in order to cover the mortgage on this property. And so again, you want to make sure you have those adequate cash reserves. At the end of the day, other than working, what I have to say is that I would have had to have probably about 5 to 7 years of cash reserves to really get through this building here, the properties that I had in this property. But I think.
But at least have
Yeah.
at least 3 months. Honestly, you should definitely have more than 6
Should have
months
more than
of
3 months.
reserves.
Yeah.
Just in case. So pretend that your property is not going to be rented for 6 months. How much money do you need to survive those 6 months, and kind of set it aside very early on? Maybe you're, as you're renting the property, you're taking all of that until you have your 6 months of reserves, and then you start to take some of the cash flow and use it for other things. But save some significant returns.
I wanted to make sure that you understood that this sounds terrible, right? But we're going to talk about, right? We didn't just, these aren't just lessons and you don't do anything about them. Like, the strategy that we develop, right, is really meant to help you avoid these types of situations, right? That's the idea, is that you're buying it so right. You're buying a property that cash flows so well, and you're always thinking about ways to increase that cash flow, that you're not going to get yourself into problems. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I'm just saying it's less likely. And then in that situation, you do need less cash reserves. But regardless, you should have cash reserves because you just can't predict everything that's going to happen. Something unexpected might happen. And so you want to make sure you have those cash reserves. And this last one is actually one that we added because this one is more about, it's less about the trouble you can get into. It's more about the opportunity, right, that you can take advantage of if you have dry powder, or dry powder is just another name for have access to cash, right? Access to liquid cash. And if you have access to liquid cash, then that means that you can take advantage of opportunities, because during a recession, there's going to be steeply discounted properties. And the people who, there are more millionaires made during a recession, right? And so if you have some dry powder and that you can access, that you can use to buy these steeply discounted properties, you can do really well. You can take a huge step up in wealth. And this is the opportunity that recessions present, but only if you're in a position where you have that dry powder ready to go.
Yeah, and so we can talk about some ways to get dry powder, things like getting a HELOC and just having it available. Obviously, liquid cash is a really great way. And then also just having partners. If you have some friends who have some money, that would be another way to make sure you have other people who have access to money. Because I think one of the when you speak to people who are real estate investors during a recession, the thing that they often say is they wish they had more money to buy all the really good deals around them. And if the banks are a lot more closed and they don't want to lend, then you're in a situation that you're trying to find money to be able to buy all these really great deals. And just like you're having that problem, so are everyone else. And so not as many deals are getting sold, and that's what part of the reason the prices are low. So if you plan ahead, and have that dry powder kind of ready to go, it's going to really help you out a lot in the next year or two.
Yeah, and I'll give you a real good example here is if you want to get a HELOC, for example, right? That's a loan. And what do we just say about loans? You can't get loans during a recession, right? I mean, banks are not going to give you a HELOC during a recession. In fact, I had a HELOC.
I wouldn't, that's not 100%.
Well, in the 2008 recession, I had a
less
HELOC.
likely.
I had a HELOC and they tried to take it away from me. I mean, it was crazy, the types of things that were going on. And, another source is a securities-backed loan. And so that is taking your securities. So if you have mutual funds or you have stocks, what you're able to do right now, while banks are still lending, is you're able to get a securities-backed loan or line of credit, and that will give you access to cash. But trying to get those things in place during a recession, much more difficult. I'm not going to say impossible, much more difficult. But during the 2008 recession, it was not possible.
Now, this is
just the fact.
less likely. This is less likely to be as bad as the 2008 recession. So we're really preparing you guys for the worst. I mean, it's one of the good things that's happened over the last, last couple of years, I will say the last year with recession, with interest rates being so high, is a lot of people have not been able to buy homes. And so there's a lot of still people who want to be renters. And there's still a lot of cash that's kind of sitting on the sidelines of people who are going to try to jump back in once prices go down. And they've just been waiting for the last 12 months. So I think that it's not going to be, it's not going to likely be as bad as 2008, but nobody knows for sure. And so we're preparing you for the worst in drawing from these 2008 examples, which were really quite extreme, but there's a lot of really great lessons to learn from it and just to be prepared ahead of time for that.
And we're preparing, right? We are preparing for this by
doing all of these things. We're doing all of these things, including setting aside dry powder so we can take advantage of what's to come.
Yeah, and I just so you guys know, I mean, this is us doing this on an active basis. I mean, this is real, right? We're actually going and doing these things. One of the things that I did was recently look at the rents on my properties, and I saw a couple of properties where we hadn't increased the rent in the last several years. So great opportunity right now to increase rents because just imagine during a recession, one of your tenants either has a shaky job situation, maybe loses their job, but they do have some savings, they're able to pay their rent. But you think you're going to get a rent increase during that time? No way, right? This is the time to get your rent increases in. And so that's what I'm doing, right? Just as an example, looking at our portfolio, seeing what's going on, seeing where we can kind of get some extra cash flow, and that'll ultimately give us more cash reserves.
This is also the opportunity if you already own a property or two. I know a lot of people we have come into our community, into our courses, are accidental landlords, and they own, a residency house or a residency condo or things like that. If you own those types of properties, this is a perfect time to download our cash and cash calculator and look how it's performing, and see how the cash and cash return is. Because if it's not performing very well and you can't see any opportunities to increase that income, it might be a property that, prices haven't started to drop that much yet. It might be a property that you decide, what, I'm going to move and put this up for sale right now, get rid of it because it's just really not a great investment, and free up that cash to be able to take advantage of what's to come. So there might be those kind of opportunities to reassess what you have, if you have some properties already, and make some decisions about what's going to set you up best going forward in the next 6 to 12 months. And that's kind of some of the decisions we're making in real time too. We had a property that we refinanced fairly recently, before the interest rates went up, and now it was kind of cash flow neutral. And we said, do we really want to hold on to this? If prices drop, do we want to hold on to this for the next 5 years with cash flow neutral? And we're like, no. So we just sold it. So we're making these kind of decisions in real time with our portfolio as well.
All right. So what is the strategy for building a wealth during a recession? What do we do with those lessons? Well, we developed a system. We call it the Fast Fire system. And the Fast Fire system consists of 5 parts. Really, the first 4 are the strategy. The 5th one is really about making sure that you get those experiences, right? You don't just kind of sit on the money and don't go out there and live. You got to make sure you live. And that's why that the 5th one is called experience the money. But I'm going to focus on the first 4 here. See the money, make the money, keep the money, and expand the money. So see the money is really about making sure you have the right mindset or psychology when it comes to money. I know there's a lot of money scarcity, money fear, fear of losing money, fear of making a mistake, right? And so if you're going to be investing, you are going to be dealing in hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of real estate. And so all of a sudden, it's gonna, if you don't have fear about it, you probably will when you start looking into those 30, 50 unit, 100 unit apartment complexes. The numbers start to get kind of like it gets up there, right? And can cause a lot of fear in people. So but even still, right, you hear these stories about recessions, and that could also scare you, right? Because you hear and you're like, man, I could be in a situation where I buy a property and the value doesn't recover for 10 years and I'm buying at the peak, right? This is crazy. Why would I buy right now? And so you gotta have to overcome that psychology if you want to make significant changes in your life, if you want to make money with real estate, if you want to achieve financial freedom. Then that's absolutely the number one. And that's why it's the first step in the Fast Fire system.
Yeah, Kenji and I fully believe, and I will say most of our community, having now had some experience in real estate, fully believe that most of your success comes from your psychology and comes from the mindset that you have when problems come along, whether or not you are able to see them as growth opportunities, whether or not you're able to pivot quickly to solutions, how much you're going to suffer and how much you're going to focus on what you can do and what you're controlled over, have control over, and then also how you carry yourself, how you approach things, and how you form those relationships with your team, who then want to work with you and want to help you. So much of your success is predicated upon your mindset and how you conduct yourself. And so that is really what See the Money is about. It's about learning that mindset that's going to get you through those tough times, but also really help you flourish no matter what's going on, because you know how to deal with problems, issues, and come up with solutions and create a team around you that's going to help you be successful.
Yeah. And there's so much that goes into that. Obviously we can't cover it here today, but it is a whole course worth of material to cover. Okay, next one is Make the Money. And Make the Money is all about the cash flow, right? Making sure that your properties cash flow really well. And there's a second component to it, which is actually really the way that you can make a lot of money with real estate, and that's called forced appreciation. We've already talked about market appreciation. That's the type of appreciation you can't count on, right? You can't. It's just gambling if you think that that the value is going to always go up. It's the type of appreciation you can't control. Now, forced appreciation is different. Forced appreciation is the type of appreciation that you can control, and it's when you take a property, you make some really smart improvements, and you force the value of that property to go up. And again, so it's both of these things. It's making sure that your property's cash flow really well, and then forcing that appreciation. That's making the money, and that's how you can avoid getting into problems like I did with this property.
Yeah, and forced appreciation, there's a whole way to do it. We have a whole system kind of framework behind that as well. We call it a tapping hidden value, and ultimately comes for long-term properties really about increasing income and decreasing expenses. And there are tons and tons of ways to do that. I'm sure we will teach about it again at some point, but it's in all of our courses. And it's one of the core things because this is how we've made most of our wealth, is through forced appreciation. The cash flow is really great for, allowing you to have a buffer and allowing you to have that income coming in every month that's going to set you free to work on your day job however you want. But the forced appreciation is how you get really, really wealthy in a matter of a couple of years, and how you reuse that same money over and over comes out of forced appreciation. And we'll talk about that and expand the money.
Yeah. And then next one is keep the money. And keep the money is all about taking advantage of all the tax benefits of investing in real estate. And the best benefits are when you shelter your W-2 or 1099 income. And I really wish back in the day, I took advantage of all those loopholes. I mean, they weren't, I took advantage of some of the loophole, some of the tax advantages, but I didn't maximize it. And that's really the point here, is that if I maximized it, I would have had more cash reserves. And I would have, I wouldn't have had to work so many shifts every month, right? So, so keeping the money is all about taking advantage of the advantages that investing in real estate gives you, and putting more money in your pocket by, again, taking advantage of the tax incentives that are in place.
And there are tax incentives for you if you want to be a passive investor, meaning that you just want to own the property, but you don't want to do too much on it. You just want to have a property manager. But then there are tax advantages that are quite significant if you want to be actively involved. And if you want to shelter your W-2 income, you can do that with both long-term rentals and short-term rentals. And actually, people in our community will oftentimes in 1 year save six figures in taxes, either using short-term rental tax loophole or real estate professional with long-term rentals, and then sheltering their W-2. So I just want to reiterate that even if you are a passive investor, there are tax benefits in real estate, but the tax benefits are incredibly good and very, very different than you can get pretty much, anywhere else.
And then the next one is expand the money. And this is where once you increase the value of that property, there are a number of things you can do. It's called having equity in the property. You have a lot of value in the property, but it's locked up into the property. And so what you want to do is you want to tap that value. And there are a couple ways you can do that. One way is to you can actually get a loan on that, right? You can do something like a cash out refi, or get a HELOC or a line of credit on that money. And so you can access that equity. Another way is to do a 1031 exchange. And I think in a higher interest rate environment, this might be a better way to do it. And especially if you can find a really great deal during a recession, this would be a great opportunity for you to tap some of that equity. Again, even if values go down some, right, you forced appreciation. So you're still going to have equity in that property. And then if you could take that equity by selling it, taking that equity and put it into the next property, then that will allow you to significantly expand the money. And so you could, for example, take a short-term rental that you have appreciated significantly, and you can put that into a better short-term rental, or maybe you put it into a multifamily property. But either way, the idea here is that you're taking the money that you've expanded, you've grown, and then you're taking that and putting it into a bigger, more expensive property. And that's how you expand the money.
Yeah, and earlier I kind of told you guys our story of how we've grown our portfolio, and that's exactly what we've done. When you do a cash out refinance, let's say you buy $100,000 property and you make it worth 200,000 through smart upgrades or increasing income, decreasing expenses, then you get another loan, and now maybe you take out 160,000 or something like that. Well, that is money that's now tax deferred, right? Because you're not paying taxes at that point. You're able to take that and put it into another property. And so it's really a tax efficient way to use the same money over and over again. And same with the 1031 exchange. When you sell that property and you 1031, you're taking all of the money and moving it into your next property and not needing to pay taxes at that point. Then one slide we have that we should probably include it in this is you can look at what a dollar does if you pay 33% tax along the way over 20 years versus what a dollar does doubling every year without paying taxes. And at the end, you end up with about $28,000 if you're paying taxes, and you end up with almost $1 million if you're not paying taxes. And so if you can do things tax deferred for as long as you possibly can, and you can actually die and pass the properties onto your children as a new step up in basis, and they won't have to pay all those taxes you've been deferring over the years. So that's the most efficient way to do that. But the longer you defer taxes, the more money you have to work with, the more you can reinvest that and grow your portfolio. And that's another thing within Expand the Money is we always took all of our cash flow and we took all of our tax savings, anything that we made from our properties, we always reinvested it in our growth. And that's part of the reason we were able to get to financial freedom so quickly is we recycled all the money and we didn't live on it.
So the real key to building wealth during a recession is to combine all these things, right? All these things that we talked about. And there are many, many layers to this. It's not, it's not just the cash flow, forced depreciation, taking advantage of the tax benefits and 1031ing. It's not just that, right? It is, an example would be, it's finding great deals, right? Whether the market is super hot, like it has been the last 10 years, we've been teaching the same thing. You want to do is you want to learn how to buy great deals in any economy. And actually those deals will be easier to come by when there's a recession. It's just, that's when you're going to get these steeply discounted properties that have not been available or not readily available over the last 10 years. Of course, our students, people in our courses have found great deals throughout the years, even in this crazy market. But what they're doing now is they're taking those same skills that they learned to find great deals and applying it to a different environment, which is an environment where there are going to be more deals. So it's just going to be even easier for them to find these great deals because they already have the skills to find these great deals in a hot market. And so you can see that there are many, many layers to this. Again, this is the strategy that we developed from the lessons that we learned during that last major recession, and this is what's going to help you get through, not just get through, but also thrive during this next recession. Okay. All right, and we kind of talked about this, but how do you make these big step ups in wealth during a downturn? Why do you keep hearing this story that there are more millionaires made during recessions? Well, the reason is that there are a whole bunch of investors out there who are waiting and ready, right? They're not waiting and sitting on the sidelines, but they're waiting in the sense that they're ready. They're preparing themselves to jump on these opportunities when they present themselves. And in order for you to do that, right, there are people out there who are already those types of investors. You have to become what they are, right? You have to be the type of investor who can go out and find these great deals, right? I just mentioned that. You have to be you have to have those relationships where agents are bringing you those deals. You also have to know how to analyze the numbers properly. You have to also know how to negotiate to make them better. A lot of our students, they will go out and not just find good deals, but they will negotiate them to be even better. Because a lot of deals are made, they're not found. You have to learn how to force appreciation. We talked about how important that is, especially when property values drop. That's how you make sure that your property value doesn't drop. You also need to know how to make your property stand out among the competition. This is especially relevant for short-term rentals. And then you also need to be in a position to snap up great deals. And people talk about people being lucky, right? It's not luck, right? These people have prepared. They've stored up that dry powder that we talked about earlier, right? Again, we talked about how you have to act now before the recession in order to accumulate that dry powder. You also have to learn how to creatively finance. Creative financing is one way that you can go out and buy deals even during a recession. We talked about how banks just shut down. Well, that means that you're going to have to figure out how to buy these deals even when banks are shut down. And then you're going to have to learn how to use other people's money. What this means is that if you don't have the money, but if you have the skills to go out and raise money, then you're going to be able to still go out and buy deals. And again, this is another way, in addition to creative financing, where you can buy deals even when banks have shut down.
And also partnerships is the other piece to that. In our community, we are doing a lot of training with people on partnerships and how to be a great partner. And partnerships really allow you to access, potentially other people's capital. And if you have the skills and the connections to be able to find deals, like, you're very valuable too. So, there's a lot of things that can be done with partnerships and creative financing. There's a lot of people in our community right now looking for seller financing. It's actually one of the things that we're offering on one of the properties that we're selling. So there's a lot of opportunities to think outside the box, if you have the skills and knowledge to be able to do that and the connections.
All right. Okay. Well, so if you guys are, we've been talking a lot about, students in our courses, but this is one of our courses. This is Accelerating Wealth. It's our short-term rental course. And, the course will take you from knowing nothing about short-term rentals to buying and running a profitable business, because these short-term rentals are businesses. So you really have to gain the skills and learn how to operate them profitably. If you're just a mom and pop operation, then chances are, especially during a recession, the ones that are going to make it, the ones that are going to be profitable, are the ones that are being run professionally like a business. And also want to let you guys know that this is the only time this course is offered live this year. We do have a pop-up Facebook group for this upcoming course. This is a short-term Facebook group where you can get access to a lot more resources. And then finally, there is a waitlist sale coming up on April 24th to 26th. So just right around the corner. So this is Monday through Wednesday, I believe. And you can get not just a discount, but also some special bonuses as well.
You need to be on the wait list, which all of you should be on the wait list, but just if you're not, make sure you're on the wait list, because those are the only people that are going to receive the email with the discount code for the waitlist sale.
Okay.
And we forgot to mention this when we started, but if you have any questions, you can throw them into the Q&A and we'll be sure to answer them. And we'll run through whatever questions we have, and then we can end the evening.
Okay. All right, Jen. Hey, Jen. What is your experience with the variable interest rates with HELOC? Have you had to deal with wide swings? I felt more comfortable with fixed rates. Yeah, so with HELOCs, I mean, yeah, if you have a variable rate, I have experience. It's been so long. I mentioned that I had a HELOC. I had a really nice HELOC right before the recession, and then I was telling you that the banks were trying to take it away from me. But it was a variable rate. I didn't, fortunately, I don't have experience with the rising rates, because back then the interest rates were kind of around, I believe, 6% or so, 5%, 6%, and they actually trended down. So I never had that problem with interest rates going up very steeply. But yeah, I think in this type of environment, I think a fixed rate makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
But yeah, unless of course you think that interest rates are going down. But yeah, but at the end of the day, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be in a situation where you're stuck with this really, really high rate. And so if you borrow from your HELOC, yeah, see, here's what's going to happen, right? Is that if well, I'm not trying to predict anything, but here's what could happen is that if interest rates go down, then that probably means the economy is improving. It probably means that that's actually going to open up the economy because people are going to start borrowing, people are going to start buying, and then what's going to happen is that you can probably get a new HELOC, right, to replace the old one. So
Or
yeah.
you can get a loan and, you know, and get a loan on that because the interest rate's better, right? But I know that a lot of people have been dealing with higher interest rates on their HELOC, and ultimately you got to look at the cash and cash calculations and see if the deal still makes sense even with a higher rate. But at least with a fixed rate, you're going to have that number that you can put in the cash and cash calculator, say, yes, this is a good deal. I still want to buy it and not be in a situation that 6 months later, it's not a good deal anymore and you're not cash flowing, right? So I think it's definitely, you know, something I would consider is getting that fixed rate. So you have that security that it's not going to dramatically change.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys saw this. Our lender actually told us about this trueflation. And so if you kind of look at this actually looks at what's happening with inflation. It's a different measure than what the government follows. They're calling it trueflation because they think that their methodology is a better measure of inflation. And so if you kind of look at what's happening with inflation, you can see that it kind of peaked last summer-ish. And then
and the US government, I think that said the max was like at 8 or 9%, right? So this is obviously much higher that they're saying it was at.
Right, exactly. And so, and then you can see that it's dropped dramatically from 12% all the way down to now close to 4%. So, you know, if you believe this data, then inflation actually has one of the biggest impacts on what happens with mortgage rates. So when inflation goes down, then mortgage rates should come down. So if you believe this, then yeah, then maybe mortgage rates will go down, and maybe Jen, then you know you want to think about, you know, you could maybe float it. But I think if personally, if I were, and this is not investment advice, but personally, if I were getting a HELOC right now, I probably would go with a fixed rate. Wouldn't you agree?
I would. And so we go to a finance conference every February. That's pretty remarkable. And Paul Tudor Jones came and spoke to us last time, and he talked to us about what happened in the 70s. And basically what would happen is they would increase interest rates, and then inflation would drop, and then they would say, oh, we're out of the woods. And then they would lower interest rates again, and inflation would go back up. And they did this cycle like 5 times, and inflation was crazy. And so I just worry about that kind of situation of us being in the situation where like, oh, inflation's good, let's just back off now, instead of really making sure that it's, you know, it's stable for like, let's say 6 months. The tendency of the government's going to be like, let's back off right away because we want everyone buying and we want to say everything's good. But you bring that, you think about what's happened in the past, and that having happened, Paul Tudor Jones was just like very concerned that the government's not going to have the tenacity to stick through it and actually make sure that inflation is really down, but that they'll react too early and lower interest rates too early and then have that inflation go back up. And so he brought up that concern. And when I saw what happened during the 70s, like it made a lot of sense to me. So even though our lenders are saying to us, oh, inflation's down, the interest rates will start going down very soon, my concern is that when they do that things are going to go up again, and that they're going to have to react again. So that's part of my background of why I'm concerned about is what Paul Tudor Jones told us.
I want to answer Omar's question before we get to Eric's, because this kind of follows directly what we were just talking about. In the event of an upcoming economic downturn or recession, do you think short-term rental properties will continue to provide reliable cash flow? Yeah, so Omar, I think maybe I failed in developing the presentation, because you know I think the point that we're trying to make is that we developed, right. Well, let me answer. If you know what you're doing, right? If you learn the lessons from the last recession, then you can actually do really well, right? You can actually make a huge step up in wealth by buying a steeply discounted property. But you have to put yourself in a position to be able to buy those types of properties, right? If you don't have the skills, the knowledge, the know-how to buy a property in a crazy market like it's been the last 10 years, then you're not going to have the skills to be able to buy it when, I mean, anybody can buy a discounted property. But the question is, are you going to be able to buy a steeply discounted property? And those are only going to be reserved for the people who can buy properties in a really hot market, who can buy really great properties in a hot market, because they have the relationships, they have the skills, they have the negotiation, they know exactly what to do in order to get that crazy deal, right? And so yes, if you learn the skills to buy these incredible deals, then and you're paying like, let's say 2011 prices, then yes, you're going to do really well, right? Because you will have bought a short-term rental at such a steep discount. But even if the economy doesn't tank, the idea here is can you learn a system to allow you to buy a short-term rental that cash flows really well, that increases in value? Is it possible, right? And that's what we're saying, is that there is a system that we developed that you can go out and buy these short-term rentals that cash flow. You can increase the value by forced depreciation. But again, you have to learn how to do that.
Yeah, I'm just going to clarify. It's really about learning to buy the right property at a great discount, but also to run the property well, because a short-term rental is a business. And there are a lot of things you can do once you own it to really maximize profits and minimize expenses. And so that's part of the system as well, is not just buying it, but running it really well. So yes, you can do really well in any market with the right property and running it well. It's just a matter of making sure that you have these skills, knowledge, and relationships, like Kenji was mentioning, to really be able to make good decisions. If you haven't looked at 100 deals, you don't know if a good deal is in front of you or if it's a bad deal. You just don't know. And so the point is, start learning this stuff now, and then, get a lot of deals in front of you, and you're going to start to see patterns. You're going to start to see what is a good deal. And you're going to do smart things like risk mitigation, because you're going to learn that from us, and you're going to learn how to pressure test the property, and you're going to buy only good properties, but then you're going to run them well after you buy them. Hopefully that answers it. You can, put a follow-up question if you have one.
Yeah, Omer, if you have a follow-up question, feel free to drop that in the Q&A. Eric asks, we bought our first rental a couple of weeks ago. That's a triplex, but had to close with cash to win the deal. Would you recommend going ahead and doing a cash out refi, or wait until we push rents up and do some rehab to force appreciation?
Yeah, so there are really a couple ways to do this. If you were to go get delayed financing, I think that's what you're talking about doing right now. And delayed financing is after you buy a property with cash, you go get the loan, and you haven't improved the property at all. Then you're going to get the appraisal from the property purchase, and that's going to create the situation for your delayed financing. Now,
the loan is based on the purchase price, not So basically, it doesn't matter if you choose to do delayed financing, then you're even if you force appreciate, you're not going to get the appreciated value. The loan is going to be based on the purchase price.
And you just bought this a couple of weeks ago, so you presumably have not forced any appreciation. I mean, maybe you bought something that was under market rents and you've increased market rents, been able to increase rents, but unlikely just in a couple of weeks. So likely you have not forced any appreciation at this point. And as Kenji mentioned, when you go to do that delayed financing, it's based off the purchase price and the appraisal, right? And so, but if you take that same property and you do a rehab, or you increase rents and you decrease expenses, being in a multifamily, it's likely to be worth more money at that point. Now, small multifamily is a little bit more tied to the valuation of the market valuation and what else is going on with small multifamily in that neighborhood. So it's going to be probably a combination of the two that your appraiser is going to use. But if you increase the value of that property and you stabilize it, and now I think the seasoning period is 6 months, right? But in this case,
12 months.
12 months. I'm sorry, 12 months.
Certain properties. I mean, certain loans now are 12
12
months.
month seasoning
That's kind
period.
of,
So that means you have to own the property for 12 months before you can go and get the new appraisal based on what the property is worth because you've added all this value. So you got to hold on to it for 12 months to do that. So I think it's a little bit of a question for you in terms of what you're going to do with that cash if you get it. Right. I mean, it used to be a little bit easier when the seasoning period was shorter. And actually, he probably could get a commercial loan, right? And shorten that if he wanted to go look outside of the traditional routes. So that's another third option. So there's a couple options, right? One's delayed financing based on the purchase price. One is, fixing it up, forcing appreciation, and then waiting that 12-month seasoning period and getting a regular loan, a traditional residential loan. And the third option is going and trying to find a commercial loan that allows you, after you fix it up, you can use that instead and not have to wait the 12 months. So those are probably your three options. And ultimately, it's going to depend on what you're going to do with the money. Like if you're going to take the money and reinvest it in something else right away, then that money is really going to good use and rather than being stuck in the property for 12 months. And then I think it's also going to depend a little bit on how much you're going to force appreciation, because if you don't have a whole lot of forced appreciation, then it may not be worth waiting at all. So there's a couple of nuances there.
Yeah, Eric, one thing I'd offer to you, and this is only for our community, and I'm going to count you as part of our community here, assuming you haven't taken our courses, but I might recommend talking to our lenders, our recommended lenders, because they can kind of talk through the different options. They've got a lot of different options, not just your traditional residential loans, but they also have some other more commercial type loans for triplexes. Specifically, they specialize in 1 to 4 units, and so they have a lot of different both residential and commercial options. And some of those don't have the seasoning period, and so you might be able to get a good loan. And you can also talk to them about what could happen, right? Because I think one of the things you're talking about or thinking about is, well, what happens if a recession comes and then banks shut down, right? Then I might be stuck with all this cash in my property. I won't be able to get a loan for a while. So I think you might be thinking about that. And so that's where having that relationship with that lender is really critical. And so, I might suggest, working with our lender, very investor-friendly lender, problem solvers, and you can ask them that exact question. Well, what happens? What happens if there's another 2008 like recession? I mean, they were lending back then, so they know, right? They lived through that, and so very experienced guys, and then they'll be able to help you. And anybody else, welcome to reach out to them.
Yeah, and Eric said, no, we haven't forced appreciation yet. A cash out refi would just be a restock cash for the next deal. Yeah. So
Yeah,
Eric, I think it's really looking at the scenarios and, I mean, looking at how much forced appreciation you're going to have, how much you're actually going to be able to pull out, and then thinking about whether or not you can get it out in less than 12 months, because it's really hard, predicting what's going to happen in 6 months, let alone 12 months. And then thinking about what you're going to do with that money is really important too, because if you're just going to take that money out and have it sit there, then it's not as useful to you because it could be sitting in the property. But if you're going to take that money out and look for another deal and take advantage of this downturn, then that's a really valuable money to have.
Well, but we were just talking about making sure you have dry powder, right? So I think it makes
The dry
sense.
powder.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have dry powder, which we were saying that is one of the lessons from the last recession, then then you probably don't want to have it tied up in your property. Okay. Oh, Eric said we did take the long-term rental course, plan to take the short-term rental course. We made contact with Danpek's team today.
Good.
Awesome. That's
Good.
great.
There's such good resources. There are always resources for our community, even if you don't use them. They're really great educators. So that's great.
Yeah, Scott's amazing. Yeah. So just tell Scott that we talked, and yeah, he'll take care of you. He's great. Just a really good thinker too. Okay, Chris, I've been planning on entering real estate investing this year via a short-term rental due to added bonus of short-term rental tax loophole, but with the potential recession, wondering if long-term rental would be the better move. If starting with 150 to 200K, thoughts on short-term rental versus long-term rental, or split investment into both if entering market entering market this year. Yeah, I think, you really could do either if you want to. I think you can do well in both. I don't think that just because, we're going into a recession that you should avoid short-term rentals. I don't believe that at all. Because short-term rentals can come in many flavors, right? They don't have to just be vacation rentals like in the Florida Panhandle, for example, right? It's not just those types of locations. You can choose a short-term rental in a city, right? You can choose a short-term rental you can have a short-term rental near near a national in a city, or like, you can choose something like a duplex or a fourplex and turn that into a short-term rental, right? So short-term rentals aren't just this vacation rental type thing. If you kind of think ahead to the recession, think about your markets that way, then I think you can still choose a winning market and also a winning type of property and still do well with a short-term rental.
Yeah, one thing we have seen is some of our students will also buy a property, let's say a duplex or something like that, and make it a short-term rental that first year and then turn it into a midterm rental the next year. It's furnished and it's going to be something that cash flows well as a midterm rental, and they don't want to do as much work because the short-term rental is a little bit more work. So you have a lot of options. But I really love those options like that are small multifamily that work as short-term rentals, because ultimately you have such a good backup plan of making it a long-term rental too, but you still get the benefits of higher cash and the short-term rental tax loophole, which are the real benefits of short-term rentals over long-term rentals. So
yeah,
that's the ideal in my mind.
Yeah, if you're applying the fast fire system, right, and you're trying to hit on all those things we talked about, right? The cash flow, the forced depreciation, and maximizing the tax benefits, right? If you do all those things, then you're also setting yourself up to expand the money, right? Which is that you take that property that's appreciated, the short-term rental that's appreciated, and then you have that opportunity to potentially 1031 that into the next property, or maybe pull the equity out if the interest rates go down, right? So you'll have a lot of options. I just wouldn't look at it as just kind of just like the next 6 months, right? I mean, it's like what you're doing is you're gaining skills that you're going to have for a lifetime. And, Eric was just saying he took the long-term rental course. He's planning to take the short-term rental course. He's thinking about it like, I just want to accumulate the skills. I want to have the skills to know how to have a unfurnished rental or a furnished rental. I mean, that's how back in 2006, when I had my first, we called it a short-term rental, but it was actually a furnished rental. There was no such thing as a short-term rental back then. But you want to have the skills to be able to furnish a rental and operate it that way, or not, right? Actually, we have a 180 unit in Kansas City, and I was just talking to the team about, hey, can we take some of the units and turn them into furnished rentals, right? And cater to maybe healthcare professionals or corporate. And I think it's a really cool play. And again, it's just because we have the skills and the confidence to be able to go do it. We're able to potentially take advantage of an opportunity where we can significantly boost the income of this property way more than we would if it was just a long-term rental. So that's what you're doing, is you're accumulating skills that will help you when, let's say that there is a downturn and you have some dry powder. You can go out there and buy a short-term rental at a steep discount, right? Maybe it's a short-term rental that got in a short-term rental owner that got into trouble, that has already set up this beautiful short-term rental that you're able to snap up just because it's the recession and they have to just dump it and get rid of it, right? And so then you're ready to go, operate it because you already have those skills, you have the confidence. If you didn't have those skills, you'd be less likely to be in a position to pick up that great short-term rental. And so
Oh,
that's
you
this is
won't,
really
you
about.
won't be in that, you
Yeah.
likely won't be in that position because you won't have the team who finds the deal and says, hey, here's a really great deal. And then you have the ways to analyze it. And then you can act quickly because it's a really great deal, right? Because if you don't have the skills, you're not gonna be able to analyze it, but also you're gonna be stuck in analysis paralysis because you don't really know what you're doing. And that then you have that fear and you can't really act. We have seen so many people buying terrible deals since we started investing together in 2015. It's crazy. So people will get into trouble. People have been buying for appreciation, buying non-cash flowing properties, long-term rentals, short-term rentals. We've seen people doing this for years now. And so, you know, with interest rates going up, and if there's a recession, it's people are going to be in big trouble. And we're already starting to see that. And also want to say that we're starting to see our community being able to negotiate a lot more effectively now. And so we've seen changes starting to happen, and it's likely to accelerate over the next 3 to 6 months. And again, you just want to be ready. This is such an opportunity. And I know this presentation was a little bit doom and gloom because we wanted you to be prepared, but this is the opportunity of a lifetime. When Warren Buffett went into the recession in the 70s, you look at his net worth growth from before the recession to after the recession, it was like exponential because he had the skills and he had the relationships and he was able to manage his mind enough to be able to take action. If you can't manage your mind, if you don't have the skills, if you don't have the relationships, you're not going to be able to make anything of this recession. Whereas the rest of us who have, done this work have gotten to the point that we're able to manage our minds, at least better anyway, and have the skills and have the relationships. It's such an incredible opportunity coming. And so you really can be in a situation that you're excited going into this recession if you get all the pieces in place.
Yeah. Nice.
Okay.
Amazing.
Well, I think we answered everything. Yay. Thank you guys for joining us. This was really fun. And hopefully we'll see a lot of you in Accelerating Wealth and in our other communities, in our Facebook communities. We have semi-retired physicians and we're in there answering questions, semi-retired professionals. And we look forward to working with all of you.
Okay.
Good night, guys. You're welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. Okay.